On today's show, the New Orleans Pelicans are reportedly aggressively trying to trade up for pick 2 or 3 in this year's NBA draft to take Scoot Henderson themselves, with Zion Williamson's name being thrown around in trade talks. But even if it's not for picks 2 or 3, how much longer will Zion be a Pelican for, with his name circulating the rumor mill quite a bit? We're going to break it all down for you coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players. If they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. And Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That's NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA. They've got you covered for all the action over at Prize Picks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. They're safe. They offer fast withdrawals, currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That means if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Pelicans, Jake Madison. You can track down wherever you listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Pelicans. And Jake, Shams Charania dropping some pretty big news this past week that the Pelicans are aggressively looking to trade up to draft Scoot Henderson in this year's NBA draft. Let's start right there. What would a deal even begin to look like for the Pelicans to move up to 2 or 3 to be able to select Scoot Henderson?
Look, Scoot's a guy they really like and zeroed in early on in the draft process as someone that they think you could build a franchise around, truly. So anyone who, and most draft heads, I think, feel he's really good too, and this is a guy that could be the number 1 overall pick in any other draft, which is all to say that any sort of trade is going to have to involve either Zion Williamson or Brandon Ingram. Yes, the Pelicans have other picks from the Drew Holiday trade to the Milwaukee Bucks, the Anthony Davis trade to the Los Angeles Lakers. But let's be realistic in this draft. It's not going to be a package of 5 mid first round picks at best that's going to get you to move up to number 2. This is going to be something that involves a star name player, with Charlotte looking to be more competitive right away. And that means you're going to be looking at Zion or Brandon Ingram.
Obviously, it kind of depends on what direction Charlotte ultimately wants to go with the number 2 pick. They kind of have the keys here and they're driving the car. But which team is a better trade partner in your eyes for the Pelicans, right? Does it make more? Is Charlotte the better partner, or is Portland the better partner?
You know, this is not about trading up to 2 or 3 and just getting a higher draft pick than the 14th overall pick they have right now. Like, this hinges on Scoot Henderson. If Scoot Henderson is taken 2, there's no deal done, getting done with Portland. And so a deal with Portland, who's at 3, would really only be if they are on the clock and Charlotte took Brandon Miller at number 2. So this hinges on Scoot Henderson entirely. To be safe, you got to trade with Charlotte, right? You can't trade, say tomorrow before Thursday with Portland and then someone else swoop in and trade with Charlotte. And now you're stuck with the 3rd pick and a player you don't particularly want. So this is something that's kind of Charlotte or bust right now, I think.
And I mean, does it look like at this point with those 2 names, it seems like Charlotte is really kind of targeting, a wing player more so. So I think Brandon Ingram probably is more the guy that they would have their eyes set on. But does it change the calculus there a little bit, right? Does it make it a little bit easier to stomach potentially trading Ingram versus Zion? How do you weigh which guy you'd be more comfortable trading if you're the Pelicans?
Right. Like, that's kind of the key to all of this. And what is their values around the league? I think everyone looks at Zion Williamson and sees he's the more talented player, right? He's got an MVP level ceiling, an all NBA level ceiling. This is a guy who, when he plays, is completely dominant. But the key is when he plays. He's played 29 games in the past 2 years combined. That's not particularly great. And I think that's something that's scaring off a lot of other teams. So do you go the safer route? Do you trade for a guy like Brandon Ingram, who's made one All-Star game, doesn't really get in the consideration for any of the All-NBA teams, isn't as good as Zion Williamson, but plays more? And that's a position of need on the wing, a wing go-to scorer. There's some Kevin Durant to his game. He's also a hometown guy for Charlotte, more or less. Bringing him in there maybe as a way to sell your fans on the project and whatever it is that they're doing there. But you also have injury concerns with him. He's only played 60% of games the past 2 seasons. So there's injury concerns all around, and it makes it tough to figure out the values for either of these two guys. I think most people hear Zion Williamson in a trade and you view him as the centerpiece of that, and everything else is kind of ancillary. But maybe Charlotte's looking at that and is like, no, the 2 picks way more valuable than Zion Williamson right now. And ultimately, I think that says that it's going to be tough to get a deal done when the valuations for these guys are all over the place like that.
Yeah, it's really tough to kind of pinpoint how to quantify some of these values. But, starting looking at, whether it's Zion, whether it's Ingram as maybe the centerpiece for a deal here, how much becomes too much to give up for Scoot Henderson? You talk about him as a, potential franchise guy, franchise altering type talent. How much would be too much to try and trade up to acquire him?
Yeah, I actually talked about this on my show the other day. I do think there's breaking points here. And if you listen to the Locked On Hornets podcast, they were saying that for the 2nd overall pick, you need a Rudy Gobert type of package. And I just cannot imagine the Pelicans giving up close to 6 first-round picks or something alongside Zion Williamson or Brandon Ingram. You'd need to include a guy like Herb Jones, maybe Trey Murphy, who looks like he could be a breakout star, plus 4 more first-round picks, plus the 14th pick in this upcoming draft. That just feels too rich for a Pelicans team that does feel good about their roster. There's a couple of reasons they're doing this along, in part because of an upcoming salary cap crunch in 2 years, but they don't need to make a move right now. So I think that if the price gets too high, they're just going to back away and go, hey, we were first in the West in December. If our guys stay healthy, and that's a big if, we feel pretty good about where we'll finish in the West, maybe in the top 4. This is a team they feel can be competitive. So if the price gets too high, they're going to walk away from a deal.
Even if it's not in a deal for the 2nd overall pick to take Scoot Henderson, whatever, it feels like the Pelicans are maybe kind of approaching a crossroads with Zion, right? The health issues, the off the court drama. I mean, is it time for New Orleans to seriously consider moving Zion? And what would a adequate return even look like at this point for Zion, even if it's not for Scoot Henderson?
I think these rumors are coming up for 3 reasons. The first is that salary cap crunch coming in 2 years. This is one of 2 franchises that's never paid the luxury tax, and there's no way to avoid it, basically in a year. And so if they want to be competitive and all of a sudden you're spending an extra $50 million, I don't know if that's something that the franchise can really stomach. So it's better to get ahead of that type of situation than the year it's got to happen, because otherwise you lose leverage in trade negotiations and your backs are up against the wall. I also think this is coming up because they just really do like Scoot Henderson. This is a guy that they think can be kind of your franchise cornerstone, a guy that you can build a culture around. And then that ties into what you had just said. They're a little fed up with some of the stuff around Zion Williamson, and to a lesser extent, Brandon Ingram, I think. 29 games for Zion over the past 2 seasons. There's been questions about his commitment. There's been questions about his maturity. There's some off-court drama right now, which really shouldn't impact what they do with him, but maybe factors into the calculus a little bit. And it's just always something. And for a small market team that wants to be competitive, that's a big risk to have out there. So is it better to move on from someone like that for a little bit more consistency? He should still fetch a very high return. His extension kicks in right now. He's 22 years old, and there's a 5-year deal in place for him. That's not something you necessarily want to give up on, and that should give teams that want to take that risk a lot of assurances that he's not going to bolt after a year or two, because simply he can't. So for a guy with that much potential at that young of an age, no matter what deal were to get done, the return would be very, very high, you would have to imagine.
That's the deal where you get a Rudy Gobert-esque return back, probably not the Scoot Henderson trade. What will the Pelicans ultimately do on draft night? How much longer will Zion actually be in New Orleans for? You'll have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Pelicans. Jake, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.